Fantasy Podcast. Faraz, Zach. We're here to go over quarterback and running back rankings today for Week 16. If you made it this far, congratulations. You're in the semifinals. But it's not over. We could celebrate that we made it here, that we made it this far. And that's great. Pat yourself on the back just a little bit.
Yeah.
Now look forward, and it's not over yet. If you think your team sucks, you never know, because there's a lot of interesting games this week, and there's a lot of weather concerns for a bunch of these games this week. So you never know how things are gonna go. But let's talk about the weather real quick for this week. There are 7 games with totals under 40, which is crazy. Like, I don't even remember the last time I've seen that. And, so don't expect a whole lot of scoring this week in general. Cleveland is going to be really bad. Vegas has this game at a 31.5 total. Okay, 31.5. Okay, that's winds in the 20 to 25 mile per hour range. The gusts can reach up to 30. So pass catchers are likely going to be severely limited in this game. I think Kamara and Chubb are fine, but I'm benching Dalton in a 2 quarterback league, super flex league. I have Deshaun Watson down at 20 this week. Maybe that's even too high, but at least he can run. So that kind of like can save him a little bit. But I think guys like Chris Olave, Juwan Johnson, Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, David Njoku, they're all risky plays this week. Taysom Hill, might get a little bit of a bump maybe because, he might join Alvin Kamara and run the ball and all that.
Yeah. Taysom Hill, as a gadget guy, maybe they just work him into the play calling a little bit because they aren't going to be calling a regular game in this game. I don't trust either of these offenses, especially like you said, New Orleans and Cleveland coming in. Neither of them are good offenses in good weather. So imagine in bad weather. Amari Cooper, I'm not expecting anything at all. We've seen him on the road. I don't think he's a fair weather player. I don't think he plays very well out in the cold. Deshaun Watson hasn't been playing, super inspiring either. So I would leave maybe, I don't want to say I'm going to bench Amari Cooper, but definitely temper expectations for him. Like you said, the run game is going to be what's doing it this week. Do you think maybe kickers have a good day? Like, do you think they'll even be able to drive the ball that far? I don't think that's going to be the case.
That's even worse. Like, kickers are going to be missing all day long. I don't even think if the winds are at 25 miles per hour, they're not going to they're not going to go for field goals.
Oh, I didn't know there was a wind too. I know it was supposed to be cold.
Oh yeah, that's the main concern. The main concern for the passing game is always the wind. So if it's windy, 25 mile per hour, like that's significant, and it's going to impact the passing game. I have I had Juwan Johnson. We talked about this, last week. And talking about him being such a good play moving forward, but this week, I don't think I can play him, dude. Like, I picked up Noah Fant, and I might end up playing Noah Fant over Juwan Johnson just because of this weather. Unfortunately, I don't want to overreact to weather, but this game seems like one to react to.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, I saw, isn't it like negative kickoff temperatures in like 4 or 5 of the games?
Yeah,
I think the Bills game, at least Bears is like negative.
That's what the feel like temperature is, at least, so it's going to be cold as hell in a bunch of these games. It doesn't affect like a whole lot of scoring when it's like super cold, but when it's windy and it's rainy, that's when it really affects the passing game. So just keep that in mind. I think Alvin Kamara is a decent start this week as a solid RB2 against Cleveland, already a team that is not good at defending the run. So keep that in mind. Taysom Hill seems like a Taysom Hill game to me this week. Now in other games like this Thursday night as well, against the Jaguars and the Jets, a little windy and rainy, that might affect whether you start Trevor Lawrence or not. This was already a tough matchup against the Jets in New York, or in New Jersey, I should say. But keep that in mind. I have him as a low end QB1 this week. But if you have some other low end QB1 options, you might consider not starting Trevor Lawrence this week if you have some other options.
Right. Yeah, I think that's fair. Even though he's been playing really well, the matchup plus the weather, like you said, is going to be pretty significant in this matchup. I don't think, like, if Trevor Lawrence is going to do good, I mean, what about Zach Wilson?
It's going to be bad.
Thinking about that. It's going to be pretty bad. It might be, like you said, one of the quietest fantasy scoring weekends that we've seen in a little while. Because the weather looks like garbage, and it's too bad because Christmas Eve. But we'll see how it goes.
Buffalo in Chicago as well. This one's a high win game. So like I would say the level of concern for the Cleveland game is at like a 10.
Yeah.
Level of concern for the Buffalo Chicago game is probably at like a 7. And then the level of concern for the passing game in the Jets Jaguars game is at like a 5. So the Buffalo and Chicago, like high winds, right? Very cold. It could affect the passing game. It shouldn't affect Justin Fields a whole lot. I still have him at my quarterback 3 this week. I have Josh Allen as my QB1 because these guys are good at rushing the ball, right?
Right. Yeah, you look at it, Josh Allen, he's not only good at rushing the ball, but he can also throw it even when it's cold. He's a bit of a winter warrior. So, like you said, he's kind of built for those games where, he's really not supposed to be doing very well. But despite the weather, he gets it done. I think if you're going to have any good, strong matchup in this type of weather, it's going to be the Bears and the Bills because they both have rushing quarterbacks. And Justin Fields can be able to get it done. I trust him to get it done with his legs. I'm not sure how much I trust him to get done with his arm, but that hasn't been, really necessary. As long as he throws a touchdown or two and just keeps himself clean, doesn't throw any picks, he'll have a really nice ceiling for it and a solid floor with that rushing upside. And Josh Allen, we just know who Josh Allen is. There's no worrying about him. He's our QB1 for the week.
Yeah, and Chicago has been pretty bad against quarterbacks lately. So, Devin Singletary and James Cook, I think, get a little bit of a bump. If I'm starting either of them, it's going to be Devin Singletary. But they're going up against Chicago, first of all, right? They're bad against the run. And then on top of that, the Bills might actually depend on the run a little bit more in this game. Yeah. We already thought that they might do that coming into this game, but now with the weather, they might do that even more. So those are the main ones. There are a couple of other interesting weather concerns, but nothing that will really affect fantasy to make a bunch of start-sit decisions based on it.
Right.
All right, so let's get into quarterback rankings. Still have Josh Allen at number 1. Like you said, he still finds ways to get it done. The matchup is great. Over the last 4 weeks, the Bears have given up the most fantasy points to the position. Yeah. So Josh Allen against them, even in the elements, like just start him.
Yeah.
Patrick Mahomes at number 2 against Seattle. Justin Fields at number 3. Again, we're depending on his rushing ability in this game. I can see him having more than 100 yards easily in this week. This week he had 95. Last week against Philly, he had a ton of rushing attempts. He's back to his usual workload when it comes to the run game, which is great considering that he had that shoulder injury a couple weeks ago. So he should be fine. And then Joe Burrow, in New England with all of his weapons, with Joe Burrow, with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd. They might even get back Hayden Hurst this week as well.
Right.
So that would be good for Joe Burrow to get all of his weapons there. So going into New England, this might be a little bit of a cold game, but it shouldn't really affect the passing too much.
Yeah, I'm not worried about Joe Burrow with his full complement of weapons. I'm not super psyched about the matchup. New England has been a little bit tougher, but they're not anything to go crazy about. He, like I said, he has his full complement of weapons. He was extremely efficient in the touchdown department last week, and he only had 200 yards, but he threw 4 touchdowns. I'm expecting more of the same because of his full complement of weapons being available. He's one of the most consistent quarterbacks this season. Really safe 15-point floor. I'm not worried about it at all. And he has that ceiling of overall QB1 on a weekly basis to boot. But then also with Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, the only thing I was tempted to maybe put Patrick Mahomes at 1 because he has a pretty good matchup in what could be a shootout against Seattle. But I think Josh Allen, like we said, he's the winter warrior. He'll be able to get it done. The matchup for him is as ideal as it's going to get. We said that the Bears are allowing the most points to QBs over the last 4 weeks. So I think that's a really good, just slam dunk. He's going to be the number 1 quarterback this week. And Justin Fields too. You talked about the rushing ability being there. Even in a tough matchup, I'm not worried about it. As long as he has that rushing ability, he's a must start in all leagues because the Bears, if the Bills go up, there's a chance. The Bears have been competitive in games, but the Bills go up. This Bears offense could be chasing points. And that's been Justin Fields' wheelhouse all season.
Let's see. It's when you look at Joe Burrow, right? You look at what these quarterbacks have done lately against New England. Like Derek Carr threw for 3 touchdowns last week. The week before that was Colt McCoy. So whatever, he still threw for 246 yards though. Josh Allen threw for 2 the week before that, and the week before that, Kirk Cousins threw for 3. So pretty confident that Joe Burrow can potentially get 3 touchdowns in this game.
Yeah.
And then you got Tua at number 5 against Green Bay. This game might actually have a little bit of scoring in it, right? Like, because the Packers defense isn't great. Miami's defense isn't great. 49.5 over under. I think this is the highest over under of the week, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, right?
It is. Yes, you're right. And so yeah, dude, like this is a game that you want to target. I think that all of his receivers have good matchups in this week. I'm not worried about Jair Alexander at all.
Hmm.
Start Tyreek, start Jalen Waddle. And even these running backs, we talked about, Jeff Wilson potentially being hurt. We'll see if he gets bumped up to a limited practice today. But just keep in mind of that because Green Bay is also really bad against the run.
Yeah.
But yeah, Tua, Aaron Rodgers, both of them can go back and forth. Did you get to see the spread on this game? I'm wondering how close they think this game is going to be.
I didn't see the spread.
-4.
I saw
Yeah,
the over under. Yeah.
yeah, Dolphins are favored by 4 points in this game, so should be a close one. And this is in Miami,
Yeah.
so I think Tua can have a pretty good day this week.
Yeah. One of the few games where, we're not worrying about the weather at all, really. I mean, I think
It's
that the
Miami,
Dolphins,
baby.
yeah, I think the Dolphins are probably like, thanking God. They're like, oh,
Yeah,
that we're not going to the frozen tundra. Could you imagine what the weather's going to be like? I don't know. I might have to look that up then and just see what the weather's supposed to
in
be
Green
in
Bay,
Green Bay
probably
if
terrible.
they were going to play it. Because could you imagine them going to play that, going to Buffalo one week and then following that up with Green Bay the next week? That would have been tough. But I love to in this matchup. I think Green Bay, they're not a scary defense at all. Jair Alexander has not been playing the way that we've expected him to play based on the way we've seen him play the rest of his career this season. He's having a bit of a down year. But with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle playing, you can't ever just count Tua out. I think this is a good matchup at home. They need this one, for the playoffs. I think they're going to play hard. It should be high scoring. I was surprised. I thought maybe the Chiefs and the Seahawks would be the highest one as far as the over-under. I think they're second. They're at 48.5 instead of 49.5, but it's close. I expect Tua to do big things because it's in Miami. If it was in Green Bay, completely different conversation. But Tua in Miami, I like him at 5. That's good. I would put him over Justin Herbert, even though he's in a good matchup. Who we have at 6. I think that he's playing a little bit down to the competition. He hasn't been as explosive as we wanted him to be in a really good stretch of matchups these last 5 weeks.
Yeah, and I'm tempted to put Geno Smith above Justin Herbert if he had Tyler Lockett. So if Geno had Lockett this week, I would probably.
Yeah, if Geno Smith had Tyler Lockett, it would be a big difference. I mean, Justin Herbert, like I said, he hasn't been playing as well. He's been on a really good schedule these past few weeks, Justin Herbert has. So it looks like he should be producing more than he has. I think that's true. But Geno Smith, if he had Tyler Lockett, I would put him over Justin Herbert, definitely.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. So yeah, it's like it's one of those things. Justin Herbert, man, like every time you think he's going to do well, like this year, like he's not doing as well as he could, right? Like he's
right.
He's Indy's kind of a middle of a road type of matchup. They did get destroyed last week. When they had to come back, when the other team was forced to throw the ball. I'm curious to see what is going to happen in this game. I can't predict game script in this one. Like I
Right.
can't. If I had to guess what's going to happen, like I could see the Colts running the ball pretty well, having this game close. I can also see Justin Herbert and the Chargers going up in this game. So this is going to be an interesting one, man. This is one of the tougher matchups to read for me this week.
Yeah, it's a really tough matchup because the Colts, they didn't look bad, obviously, in the first half last week, but they were really bad in the second half last week. But I think that has to do with the game script. I think the Colts are better than their record indicates, and they could keep it close. I like Justin Herbert, though, anyway, in this matchup. Like I said, I just want to see him hit that upside. He has all of his weapons now, and we didn't see it last week. I don't know what that was about. It was a really good matchup against the Titans. It was just a quiet day for them overall. But I think he has the upside still, but he hasn't shown that safe floor like other quarterbacks ahead of him have this season. That's why he's kind of floating down this 6 range this week.
Yeah, so we have Herbert at 6, Geno at 7, Kirk Cousins at 8 against the Giants, Dak Prescott at 9 against Philly. We'll see what Gardner Minshew can do on the other side. Will they be able to stay up with Dallas? Will Dallas be able to score, on Philly's defense, which I think they will. So, it's one of those things where what will the game script look like? But I think Dak will be solid this week. Philly, regardless of who the quarterback is, I think they're going to be competitive. And I think Dak is going to end up having to throw the ball. I would normally have Trevor Lawrence above him, I think this week, but he's going up against the Jets in New York in a little bit of bad weather. So I'm going to go Dak over Lawrence, who I have at 10.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I was looking at the rankings and I was really tempted to put Trevor Lawrence over him, but just the weather conditions, were enough to sway me to put Dak higher than Trevor Lawrence this week too. I think Dak is going to be fine as far as production. It's not like the Cowboys are going to go up. I think Gardner Minshew is better than a lot of people, think he is. And this is a situation that I would say rivals the 49ers as far as you could put any quarterback in and they'd be all right. this is a good offense and a good defense, just a good team overall for Philadelphia. And if Gardner Minshew comes in, he's going to be able to play and keep him competitive. I think he could be a starter, on a couple teams throughout the league. I think that he's just kind of taking this backup role and run with it. But I think it's going to be a close enough game that Dak's going to be throwing the ball enough. It's a division game. It's going to be close regardless. So I'm not worried about Dak at all this matchup. I'm not expecting a humongous ceiling, but it's not going to be a dud week this week. Yeah, I think he'll settle right in the 18, 20-point range like he's been.
Yeah, I agree. And then I got Daniel Jones, your arch nemesis, at number 11 against Minnesota. It's a good matchup. He has a little bit of a rushing floor. And I have Tom Brady at 12 in Arizona. These are both away games for both of these guys. I have Jared Goff down at a 13. I think Jared Goff had a couple of really good games against two bad defenses. And I think he was being elevated to a point where he didn't really deserve to go. And I understand this offense is good. Carolina, though, in Carolina, I think this isn't a slam dunk for Jared Goff. And that's why I have him down at 13. I like the matchups more for Daniel Jones. I think he has a higher floor. Same thing with Tom Brady. I like his matchup more. You saw that he was able to get some production out of Russell Gage as well. So, I think both these guys have higher floors than Jared Goff. But Goff definitely has a ceiling. If you're shooting for it, I think Goff probably has the higher ceiling because of the weapons that he has.
Yeah, I think that's 100% fair, and that's kind of how I look at it too. I was tempted to put Jared Goff higher, but I think you're right when you say that his numbers might have been a little bit inflated by some good matchups these last few weeks. Carolina isn't a fantastic matchup. They're not a bad matchup either, but they're a pretty good defense, just on paper when you look at them. Daniel Jones, I know I'm not a big Daniel Jones guy, but against Minnesota with the rushing upside that he has, all he has to do is be efficient in the passing game, and he could have a pretty big game, settle right in that 20, 23-point range. I think that's definitely within his, range of outcomes. So I think Daniel Jones at 11 makes sense. And Tom Brady, also, like you said, you talk about the matchup. Arizona has not been very good at limiting quarterbacks. So Tom Brady, he had a good game last week. Maybe he can build on it, even though they did lose. From a fantasy perspective, though, Tom Brady is picking up a little bit of steam. And down the stretch, we could see that more, especially, like you said, with a good matchup against Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, he has 18 points in regular 4-point scoring 3 of the last 4 weeks. The only time he didn't was against San Francisco in week 14. Right. So, he's looking pretty solid right now. And then I got Aaron Jones at 14. I was actually in between him and Jared Goff at 13 and 14. But, these running backs are starting to kind of gain some momentum, in Green Bay. So I kind of think that, maybe Aaron Rodgers might end up, not throwing the ball as much. If this is going to be a true, back and forth contest, then Aaron Rodgers can do his thing. But his, now that he has Romeo Doubs, he has Christian Watson, obviously. Allen Lazard can still do his thing when he's being targeted. So he has good weapons. Against Miami in a higher point total, I'm perfectly fine starting Aaron Rodgers this week. He could have done his thing last week if they needed him, on Monday night, but they didn't really need him in that game. So, in this game, if Miami ends up scoring, maybe Aaron Rodgers has to do a little bit more.
I think that's very possible. I think Aaron Rodgers, he's been playing a little bit better, and he has more of his weapons coming back. Romeo Doubs should be back, fully. Obviously, he didn't run so many routes last week, but he did get a lot of targets. So it'll be interesting to see how he's used. And if he's having a good day, chances are Aaron Rodgers is going to have a good day, especially with Christian Watson on the other side. He's going into this game. Aaron Rodgers is with the best supporting cast. Like I said, he's out all season. With Romeo Doubs, he's now going to be healthy completely. Christian Watson's going to be healthy. Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon were getting it done out of the backfield last week. This could definitely be a high-scoring game. And like I said, the Dolphins will be thankful that the matchup is warm in Miami. That should make it easier for them to score, and also the Packers. So it should be easier to hit that over/under. That's up that high. That has them as a high-scoring game. Caesars does, I think, this week, right?
So should we go? I mean, I'm looking at this Goff, ranking, right? And would you be tempted to put Rodgers over Goff? I think Carolina line and Detroit is a 43 over/under, and Aaron Rodgers is near 50.
As we're talking about it, I kind of am. The matchup isn't that enticing for Jared Goff, where Aaron Rodgers has a really good one. If I'm not mistaken, that the Dolphins are allowing the second most points to quarterbacks this season, I think, overall. So that's really good for Aaron Rodgers, especially the way he's been coming on. He's been playing a little bit better recently these past few weeks. So I think maybe we can move Aaron Rodgers up to 13.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Let's move Aaron Rodgers to 13, Jared Goff to 14, and then Derek Carr at 15. We will not be moving him up.
No.
But he's playing against Pittsburgh. He had a decent game. He had a good game this past week because we didn't think he was going to do so well. So this week, in Pittsburgh, it's one of those matchups where it could go either way with Derek Carr, but
Yeah.
he has a high enough. I was going to say high enough floor, but then that wouldn't count all the games where he shits the bed.
Yeah.
But he only had one bad game in the last 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So I think Derek Carr can be up there. And honestly, this might be too low. We might be shitting on Derek Carr a little bit too much, to be honest with you. If you look at what he's been doing, he's had a high floor. He hasn't shown his ceiling, but the floor has been there. So, in Pittsburgh, this could go either way. But I think Derek Carr is, he's just a definition of a solid start, I would say.
Yeah. We talk crap about Derek Carr a lot on this podcast, but he's been performing exactly how we've been ranking him almost, as a high-end QB2 for most of the season. That's where I think he's going to continue to be. It's just we haven't seen the upside that we hope to see, with Devontae Adams. We haven't seen him really play with all of his premier pass catchers on the field. Obviously, Darren Waller was back last week with Devontae Adams, Mac Hollins, Josh Jacobs. I think there's room for him to improve and maybe move up these rankings, maybe this next week or two. But until we see that, I think a high end QB2 is where he's going to settle. Because Josh Jacobs, in an offense that has Josh Jacobs, it's going to be tough for him to get the insane volume that might be necessary to have the 3-4 touchdown days.
Yeah, that's true. And if I'm not mistaken, the Steelers have been giving up some fantasy points to running backs lately.
I think a little bit. I think I had a note on that.
Yeah, well, last week, the Panthers obviously couldn't get anything going, but the couple weeks before that, they have been. So I like Josh Jacobs a lot this week. I think he can potentially get back to what he was doing before last week. Last week, obviously, he didn't score.
Yeah.
But J.K. Dobbins, 15 for 120. Gus Edwards, that same game, 13 for 66. The week before that, Algier and Patterson over 5 yards a carry. Jonathan Taylor was able to do his thing the week before. So I think Josh Jacobs is in for a pretty good day this week.
It's fine. I'll talk more on Josh Jacobs when we get to him in the rankings, because I'm actually taking the opposite road with it.
Okay, gotcha. Brock Purdy at 16. Listen, Brock Purdy's just able to get it done, right?
Yeah.
He's fitting in the system. He's making the throws where he needs to throw them. He's not making mistakes. So that's really what it comes down to. And this is, as far as his ranking goes, it's him, Gardner Minshew at 17, because both of these guys who are stepping into the system and are able to just kind of take advantage because of the coaching and the weapons that they have.
Yeah, these are guys that we don't know a whole lot about. Obviously, Brock Purdy, we've seen him play for 2 weeks. And Gardner Minshew, we know what kind of quarterback he is from his days in Jacksonville. But in these offenses, we got to see how it goes. They're, like I said, they're both backups stepping into really good situations. All they have to do is be efficient. And when that kind of thing happens, I think the ceiling kind of tops out at 2 touchdown passes. They're not going to ask them to do too much. So I would temper expectations with these guys a little bit. But I don't see a situation where these guys have dud games. They're going to be playing well, I think, because of the supporting cast around them. Brock Purdy, especially, we know that's going to happen. And I expect Gardner Minshew in a game, against Dallas. It's a division game. He's going to be playing hard because of the character that he is as a quarterback. I think he's obviously a step down from Hurts in the rushing department. And I'm not saying he's as good as a passer as Hurts, but I don't think it's as big of a steep drop as it would be with most other backup quarterbacks. And I'm confident that Gardner Minshew can get it done this week. So I think having him at 17 here as a QB2 is perfectly realistic.
Then we have Zach Wilson at 18, followed by Sam Darnold at 19, and Deshaun Watson all the way down at 20, because I'm just worried about the Cleveland weather. So yes, I am playing Zach Wilson. I know the weather's bad in New York as well, but it's not as bad. I think Zach Wilson can still get it done. He still has a few weapons. And Jacksonville is one of those defenses that they do give up a lot of passing yards and fantasy points to quarterbacks over the year and lately as well. So I think Zach Wilson can be okay this week only because of the matchup, and that's pretty much it. And then Sam Darnold too, against Detroit, it's very similar thing where Detroit, they've been good against running backs, but against the pass, they haven't been as good. And it's crazy to think that I'm starting these guys over Deshaun Watson this week, though.
I don't think it's that crazy, because the problem is with Deshaun Watson, he just hasn't had the upside. And you look at the offense since he's come back, it has not been explosive at all. The touchdowns have not been there. In the cold weather, maybe 20 is a little high. I don't know. I don't trust Deshaun Watson really in this offense right now to keep things going smoothly. If Jacoby Brissett were playing, do you think maybe that the Cleveland offense would get a boost, or do you think the weather would still just affect
I think the
anybody
weather will
today?
still be a factor, to be honest with you.
Right. Okay. And then also just a question. I'm not sure if we know anything about Lamar or Huntley or whoever's going to be playing for the
Yeah,
Ravens.
that's a
If
good point.
Lamar would play, where do you think he would be ranked? Or Tyler Huntley, where do you think these guys would be ranked?
Well, you know what? The weather in Baltimore is supposed to be pretty bad too this week. I would probably have looking at the top 10 here. I would probably have ranked maybe under Dak, like right ahead of Trevor, maybe something like that. Maybe,
So that's
ahead
Lamar?
of Daniel Jones.
Is that what you're talking about?
Lamar, yeah,
Right.
like probably
Okay.
around 10, like low end QB1 this week, I would say.
Yeah. I think that's fair. That's what I was kind of thinking too. I wasn't going to put him as a QB2, but he definitely is not a high end quarterback right now, especially coming off the injury. We're not sure if he's going to play. There's a chance that he doesn't play. But even when he has played, you know, he had those great 3 weeks to start, and then since then he's been like a mid QB2. That's been about it. So I would temper expectations regardless of who starts. Tyler Huntley, do you think he even makes the top 20 if he plays? I mean, he is playing.
I might play him over Deshaun, but like barely.
Yeah.
Barely. He's barely there, I would say.
Right.
You know, and listen, man. I was high on Tyler Huntley when he took over. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, this offense is gonna be fine. Like, nope.
No,
he hasn't been looking good. He hasn't been looking good.
Lamar obviously is a step up over Tyler Huntley, but I looked at the way that they play the game. It's like they didn't have to change the offense that much, but it's been pretty drastic. As bad as the Ravens offense wasn't bad, but it wasn't really good with Lamar. But with Tyler Huntley, and it's just been like bad. You know, so it shows you that Lamar does make a difference in that offense. You can't just put anyone there. And that the lack of weapons on the outside is really showing.
Agreed. All right, let's move on to running backs. Christian McCaffrey at number 1. Derrick Henry at number 2 against Houston. Derrick Henry's last like several games against Houston had just been crazy. He's just been running all over them. So if I had Derrick Henry, I'll be very excited this week.
Yeah.
And Josh Jacobs at number 3 in Pittsburgh. So do you not like Josh Jacobs as much this week? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm not a humongous fan of Josh Jacobs this week. Maybe I see we have him at 3, but just looking at the guys beneath him, Austin Eckler and Tony Pollard. Austin Eckler has a fantastic matchup. And the top of the running back ranks are kind of loaded with good matchups. But this is a Colts team that's allowing the most fantasy points running backs over the last 4 weeks and the 5th most on the year. I like him as one of the top guys this week. The matchup makes him a top 3 option, which I would move Josh Jacobs out of. But the thing about Josh Jacobs is over the past 4 weeks, over the season, the Steelers have been allowing pretty many points to the running back position. But over the last 4 weeks, they've been allowing the 4th least to fantasy running backs this week. So per week. So I think that Josh Jacobs, after a game where, you know, they leaned on the pass game a little bit, you know, Darren Waller is back. I know the weather might be a little bit of a factor, but you have Devontae Adams, Darren Waller, these guys. Derek Carr has been playing pretty well. They're going to give Josh Jacobs his touches, but I'm not sure against this defense right now. It seems like they've been coming on as of late in the running game. I'm tempering expectations with him a little bit because they ran him into the ground a couple weeks ago, and they might take it easy on him in the cold. I'm not sure. We'll have to see. If it is cold, you know, they might use him a little bit more, but I think I want to just temper expectations a little bit. Like Austin Eckler, I think is a clear pick over Josh Jacobs this week, and maybe even Tony Pollard. I have Josh Jacobs as my RB7 in my rankings right now, but that might be a little bit drastic.
Yeah, you know, Pittsburgh is going to be really, really cold in this game. So, you know, keep that in mind. But it's nothing that would really, you know, make a whole lot of difference in terms of fantasy because the winds aren't that crazy. I think it's only 10 to 15 miles per hour in that game. So, yeah, no, I hear you, man. I think, you know, the week before, you know, the Ravens offense in terms of the running game against the Steelers they were really efficient, you know, and the week before that, Atlanta was pretty efficient against them too. So, you know, I think it just so happened that, you know, the Steelers just were like, you know, against the Panthers, they know what their identity is. And they just basically was like, yo, we're not letting you run the ball. We're going to make Sam Darnold beat us. And they didn't. That's kind of how I see it. Now, one of the other reasons why I would normally have Austin Eckler ahead of Josh Jacobs, and I would have had him this week, and I did have him over Josh Jacobs this week, but Eckler did have a shoulder injury in that game this past week, and he got tested on that yesterday. It came back negative. He's all good, but it could be bothering him a little bit, and it's possible that Josh Kelly sees a little bit more work in that backfield with Eckler not playing as many snaps as he does, maybe around 50%. He's still going to get a ton of work. That's why I still have him at number 4 here. But if I had to choose between these two guys, that's the reason why I'm going Josh Jacobs.
Yeah.
And as far as Tony Pollard goes, I think this is a matchup like Pollard is like you have to play him every single week because of the ceiling that he provides. And if Gardner Minshew can't get that offense going, Pollard can potentially get a ton of work and see it's tough to predict game script with the Cowboys these days because like over the last couple of weeks the Cowboys have been playing to the level of competition that they've been against. So this is going to be I think this is going to be a good game regardless of who the quarterback is. For the Eagles, and they're talking about Jalen Hurts might play this and that. I just think that's all gamesmanship. I think he's not going to play in this game.
He's not going to play.
But in order for the Cowboys to spend resources and time on what if Jalen Hurts plays, that's the reason why they're not going to just rule him out today. That wouldn't make any sense.
Right.
You want to make your opponent do as much unnecessary work as possible because there's only a finite amount of time to prepare. I can see that. I can totally get behind that. So Ramondre Stevenson at 6, I got Saquon at 7, Dalvin Cook at 8. I got Jerick McKinnon at number 9 this week.
I think he belongs up here this week. 100%.
There you go. And it's one of those things where coming into last week, there was no way that I was going to play Jerick McKinnon as somebody who, I knew that he was going to get it done, even though he finished as the RB1 in week 14. Coming into week 15, that was a fluky week for me. Week 14 was a fluky week for me. However, going into week 15, his route participation went up big time. Not only that, but also he had 2 straight games of eating into Isiah Pacheco's workload on the ground even more, right? Not the fact that he produced on the ground, but the fact that his running back rushing share went up to 40%, and Pacheco fumbled in that game. So McKinnon is looking like the preferred option in this backfield at this point. Complete flip-flop right now. Pacheco, I still have him, I think, in the top 20, something like that. But McKinnon, somebody that is literally like he's a must start. Like I have to have him in my lineup this week, especially in such a good matchup against the Seahawks.
Yeah, this is going to be, I think, another big game for McKinnon. He might not be the RB1. I still think that there's a level of flukiness to this performance. 2 straight 30-point weeks. You can't really expect that out of anybody except maybe, the top guys like Christian McCaffrey and receivers like Devontae Adams. But Jerick McKinnon has been getting a receiver's workload at the running back position. And like you said, plus the running back workload, part of the running back workload in the Chiefs backfield that Isiah Pacheco had a grip on, a couple weeks ago. So he's coming on in both phases. It looks like Patrick Mahomes trusts him, and he's showing, that he's one of the good pass catching running backs in the league. And we knew that going into it, but we hadn't seen this type of workload. He's taken full advantage of it. So I like Jerick McKinnon in this matchup. I think it's going to be a shootout against Seattle. This could be a really good game. Maybe I don't want to say game of the year, but in terms of scoring, there could be a whole lot because both of these defenses allow some points. And Seattle's fighting for its life, in the playoffs against the Chiefs. I love the opportunity for Jerick McKinnon this week. I don't think I'd be surprised if he settled into the top 5-6 again this week, the way he's been playing.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. Ramondre does have a tough matchup against Cincinnati, but it doesn't matter. I think he's going to get a full workload this week. He's going to be limited in practice all week, probably because of that ankle injury. But that's good. You want him to get ready for that game and not have to overwork during practice this week. So don't worry about him not practicing in full this week. And Saquon, he looked really good last week and has a matchup against Minnesota where they've been giving up a ton of fantasy points to running backs. So he might not get it done and be efficient in the running game because Minnesota has been pretty good on a yards per carry basis, but they've just been giving up points because a lot of these running backs are getting close to the goal line and punching it in both the running game and the passing game.
I just one thing before I think maybe I might put Dalvin Cook over Saquon Barkley, and I don't want to overreact too much to the matchup. But the last time we saw the Giants play against a really good team like the Eagles, they got blown out. And Saquon, he didn't have to do a whole lot. The game script wasn't favoring him. So I'm not sure if I like his upside over Dalvin Cook this week, especially if the Vikings would go up. I think Dalvin Cook, the game script could lean into him getting some more carries towards the end of the game. And I kind of like Dalvin Cook a little bit more this week just because of that.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that one. My thing with Dalvin Cook, man, he's just not as involved in the passing game. Like I know he had 95 receiving yards on that big play last week, but just not as involved in the passing game. That's my only thing. I think Saquon has a higher floor than him. But Dalvin Cook, I agree. The ceiling for Dalvin Cook is definitely higher every single week.
Yeah.
And
Just because of the offense he's on.
Yeah. And if he gets the workload, if he gets like 20 carries in this game, I can complete. I would guess that Dalvin Cook will outrush Saquon this week, like in terms of rushing yards for sure.
Right. The thing about Dalvin Cook is we've seen him get those 20 carries and put up like 9 points, where he doesn't, like you said, that receiving workload doesn't come through. But I think I trust Dalvin Cook in this matchup this week against the Giants. It should be a good game. I think the Vikings can pull away probably.
I can see that. And then Nick Chubb, they're also at home too in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Nick Chubb against New Orleans. New Orleans has been letting up to running backs lately, dude. Like they've been giving up they've been bad. Fourth most fantasy points to running backs over the last 4 weeks. And like again, we talked about this Cleveland matchup, very windy, just a nasty game. So Nick Chubb could potentially get a big workload and do his thing in this game. I think they're going to depend more on the run game this week in Cleveland.
Yeah, and we talked about this at the beginning of the show. You talked about the weather. It's definitely going to be a running type of day, in this matchup. I think Nick Chubb, he has been pretty quiet the last few weeks, but I think they can get done. He hit 100 yards, though, last week. So that was kind of encouraging against a pretty good Ravens defense. They've been coming on towards the end of the season. They've been, I think, overperforming for the talent that they have. But Nick Chubb, he should be able to get it done. This is where he's kind of been all season. We had him ranked a lot higher earlier when he was doing his thing with Jacoby Brissett under center. The entire offense for Cleveland has kind of come down to earth with Deshaun Watson. So I think having him here at 10 makes sense, especially with the weather the way it is.
Yeah, he just hasn't been scoring. That's 3 straight weeks of him, without scoring a touchdown. But before that, he had more touchdowns than games played. So those touchdowns are going to be coming back in his favor. I think he ends up, punching one in this week. Aaron Jones in Miami, I like him this week. Him and AJ Dillon have been getting it done. I think AJ Dillon's production has been a little bit fluky. He played less than 40% of snaps this past week, and he ended up getting some work inside the 10-yard line, and he ended up scoring. But Aaron Jones is still the guy. Zeke against Philly, he's been getting it done every single week. He can't stop scoring. He has that literally has that nose for the end zone. So he's gonna just keep starting him. I was tempted to put him in my top 10, but I was like, listen, man, I can't do it. The only reason why is because he doesn't have the same type of ceiling as a lot of these other guys do, like Nick Chubb and Aaron Jones. So that's the reason why I have him here at 12.
He doesn't have the workload either. And although he does get, a lot of carries, like Tony Pollard's getting the receiving work in Dallas for the most part. And Zeke, I think he's hit like 14 or 15 carries, the past few weeks. And having a touchdown every week on just 14 or 15 carries, I'd say that's just a little bit of overproduction. I think there's a chance we could see that kind of come back down to earth. I think against Philly, he will get in the end zone. He's historically been pretty good against Philly. He eats pretty well. But I think having him here at 12 makes sense just because of that touchdown upside. And like I've called him, he's a new age Jamal Williams. Like that touchdown nose that you talk about has shifted from Detroit to Dallas, and it's with Zeke, the veteran kind of taking those touches from the younger guy in Pollard. It makes sense. But I think, both of these Cowboys running backs are really good starts, and Zeke should be able to continue to get it done. I'm surprised we still have him here. I wouldn't have expected a couple weeks ago to see that Zeke is still hanging around in the top 12.
Yeah, are you kidding me? Like, I was so low on Zeke coming into the year. There's no way I would have thought I would have him anywhere near the top 12.
Right. I think, what were we ranking him? Like RB 25, 26, something like that? And that was
something like that.
That was without Pollard, being a thing.
Yeah, I mean, we knew that Pollard was going to become I think we had Zeke ranked above Pollard or maybe right around him before the season started.
Yeah, that's what it was.
But we have Kenneth Walker here at 13 against Kansas City. There's definitely going to be some clarity here because Kenneth Walker is going to play. He played last Thursday night. He had some extra. He's going to have some extra rest against Kansas City. So I think he's back up to that near elite type of player where you're going to have to start him against Kansas City. There's going to be a lot of scoring in this game. So Kenneth Walker can definitely get in on that. Casey, a little bit tough against running backs in terms of yards per carry. But if there's going to be scoring, if they're going to be moving the ball, Kenneth Walker, another guy, knows for the end zone. He's somebody that it's very hard to bench. He was easy, to bench last week if you had other options. But I think this week in a game that we think that should have a lot of scoring, he'll be fine. He did still play 75% of snaps last week, and he was a little bit more involved in the pass game too. That could be the case again, this week, especially with Tyler Lockett out.
Yeah, that definitely could be the case. You talk about that receiving workload. It could be something that we see more, like you said, with Tyler Lockett out. But the other thing that I'm looking at is, we say he has a nose for the end zone, but he hasn't scored a touchdown the past 2 weeks. And before that, he had scored, let's see, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 touchdowns over the last 6 games that he played before these last 2 weeks. So touchdown regression should be coming, I think, especially against the Chiefs defense. They're not fantastic, they're not a bad matchup. They're not a fantastic matchup either. They're right in the middle of the pack. You talk about the yards per carry, but I think that the way that this game is going to go, Kenneth Walker should be in line for at least a score, whether it's going to be through the air or the ground. I think he's going to have a solid day.
I got James Conner at 14 against Tampa Bay. He's simply been getting it done lately. My only concern this week is Trace McSorley going to be able to move the ball? That's my only concern here. However, I think he's still going to be depending on Conner in the passing game. So I think Conner has a solid floor, 10 to 15 point PPR floor, and he has room for a little bit of upside if he ends up scoring. On that last drive where Conner ended up scoring last week, McSorley did lead that drive, and I think it was like 6 for 7, and was able to kind of lead them down the field. But, obviously later in that game, I think James Conner's going to be fine this week. I just don't think he has enough. I don't think he's either as dependable this particular week only because of the quarterback downgrade.
Yeah, and even if the quarterback situation wasn't as bad as it was, I'm not sure how much higher I would be ranking James Conner. Like, would you put him inside the top 10? Like, I don't know.
I would put him above. I would put him above Zeke.
Right.
If what's his name? Who was their other quarterback again? Was it Colt McCoy? Yeah, Colt McCoy.
Yeah.
If Colt McCoy was a quarterback, I would probably have him above Walker, above Zeke, just because I think his workload is that much more secure. And he has like nearly as much of a nose for the end zone as Zeke does.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I would have him as a low end RB2 this week if the quarterback situation was a little different.
The thing with James Conner, though, you're right. I am concerned about the offense being able to move the ball. If the defense doesn't have to respect the passing game, they're just going to be able to load the box against James Conner. It could be tough sledding for him as far as, an efficiency standpoint goes. Maybe they get down to the red zone and, he punches in a touchdown. I think you're going to be depending on a touchdown this week. But like you said, the receiving work with Trace McSorley at quarterback, assuming that's the case, he might be dumping it off to James Conner a couple of times this game. That should be enough to buoy him, like you said, with that 10-point floor. I don't think you have to worry about him in this matchup. And we actually liked him, I think, last week too, because he's just been getting that workload that we like to see, that we expected to see all season.
The good thing about it is that I'm not as worried about them like stacking the box or anything, because like you still got Hopkins to worry about, you still got Hollywood to worry about. So like I don't think they'll be able to do that. I know it's still Trace McSorley, but you got to defend those guys because they can really put up some big plays. So that's what James Conner has going for him at least. Alvin Kamara, I have him at 15. It was disappointing to see David Johnson. I was gonna say David Robinson. Wow. David Johnson, running another one more route over Alvin Kamara last week, which is weird. But it is what it is. They just want to have a committee there in New Orleans. But this week against Cleveland, terrible weather. They might depend on the running game a little bit more. And I can see Alvin Kamara getting 20 plus carries in this game.
And do you think this is solely a weather ranking? I mean, the way he's been playing has not been good. The workload hasn't been there.
No.
Do you think
yeah, I would say so. I would probably have Joe Mixon ranked above him. And, maybe David Montgomery. I have them at 16 and 17. Montgomery, the reason why I have Montgomery ranked this low is because of the fact that Khalil Herbert is probably back this week.
Yeah, that's true. We had him ranked lower. Did we not have David Montgomery ranked lower than 17 last week? I don't. My memory might be completely clouded, but
probably
I remember
because
we had 24.
Because I liked ETN more. I had Miles Sanders up there. We had Pacheco higher. I had ranked above him, and it's really because of the matchups. And it was just a different situation last week.
Right. Yeah. But Alvin Kamara, I want to say I trust him here. I think this might be ranking him at his ceiling. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be a high-scoring game, and the weather won't be, really conducive. And if they keep using David Johnson, and Alvin Kamara is going to get his snaps cut, I'm not sure I like that as much to put him right behind James Conner, who's probably going to have a massive workload. I know Joe Mixon had his work cut out a little bit too by Samaje Perine, but I kind of like Joe Mixon more. The way that these offenses have been playing, and Alvin Kamara just hasn't looked like himself in the cold. I wonder if that's going to change. We've seen Alvin Kamara do his thing on Christmas weekend before. That was 2 years ago with a much different offense. So I think that maybe I'd be leaning Joe Mixon over Alvin Kamara, even though the weather does kind of suggest run heavy this week.
Yeah, it's just a good matchup for Alvin Kamara. You know what I mean? Like Cleveland has been absolutely terrible defending running backs. So that's why I have Alvin Kamara at 15, and I think I'm going to stick with that. And Joe Mixon, not a good matchup against New England in New England. On top of that, Samaje Perine is cutting way too much into his workload. So I don't trust Joe Mixon at all this week. I'm still starting him as a solid RB2, but I think if I had to guess, I would say that Alvin Kamara probably has like a good handful more touches than Joe Mixon in this game.
All right, that makes sense. We'll see.
David Montgomery, I would probably have David Montgomery over Kamara this week. If Khalil Herbert wasn't coming back this week, that's my only thing with him. However, I still think he has a solid floor. In this game, in Chicago, it's going to be a bad weather game. David Montgomery can still get some volume, and on top of that, I think he's good for like a good amount of targets in this game. He has no weapons right now. Claypool's banged up. Mooney's out, obviously. So Justin Fields is going to look for somebody. And in a bad weather game, he might be checking it down a lot, right? To David Montgomery, especially if it's windy. And it is windy in that game. So I think Montgomery will be fine this week against Buffalo. Not a matchup that I'm necessarily super, scared of or anything like that. We saw, Raheem Mostert this past week do his thing against Buffalo.
Yeah, I'm not worried about David Montgomery either. And you're right. He's like the only weapon really in this offense right now, outside of maybe Cole Kmet, but he had a quiet day last week, and we're not sure what kind of contributor he's going to be on a week-to-week basis. I like David Montgomery in this matchup. Even though Khalil Herbert is coming back, Justin Fields is obviously looking, to get the ball to somebody who can do something with the ball. And David Montgomery's, like we said, really the only guy that can do that. He did have that receiving touchdown last week, and that was a pretty tough matchup against the Eagles. I mean, the Eagles aren't, fantastic against the run. They haven't been the past couple of weeks, but I think that David Montgomery, even against Buffalo, it's almost the same situation. It's probably gonna be cold. David Montgomery should have a nice enough workload that he has that solid floor, like we said. And with Khalil Herbert playing, that's kind of what we had. This is kind of where we had him, when Khalil Herbert was playing earlier in the season. Just a solid floor play. The upside isn't necessarily the same with Khalil Herbert playing, but he's definitely startable.
Isiah Pacheco at 18 against Seattle. This is a really, really good matchup. Obviously, we like McKinnon more, who we have in our top 10 right now. But Pacheco against Seattle, he should get 15 carries in this game pretty easily. This is a game where Seattle, has been giving up so many fantasy points to running backs. They've been really, really bad. Just start Pacheco as a solid RB2. I think it's that simple. And then Miles Sanders at 19 and Travis Etienne at 20. Etienne's really low here in our rankings, but now will he get volume? I think he will. I think he will get volume. I don't see the Jets like going up in this game, right?
Right.
But it is a little bit of a tougher matchup. He's not really being used in the passing game at all. Couple catches here and there this year. And Miles Sanders at 19, even though he didn't come through last week when we wanted him to, and then afterwards he gave the middle finger to every fantasy football fan on Twitter. I think he can still get it done against Dallas. Dallas hasn't been, this great rushing defense or anything like that. If this game stays close, Sanders could get it done. And it's possible that with Minshew under center, they try to start depending on Sanders from the get.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. The Eagles are definitely going to be relying more on Miles Sanders and the run game in general this week with Gardner Minshew at quarterback. I don't think it's that, it's not going to be severely handicapped to the point where we need to change rankings really for the receivers. But Miles Sanders stands to see the best boost, because Jalen Hurts is out. He had a couple good weeks before this last week where he just put up an absolute dud. He had that fumble and things weren't looking really good for him last week against a beatable Bears defense. If I'm not mistaken, they were allowing some of the most fantasy points to running backs last week? Yeah. So he kind of fell short in that matchup, but in a division matchup against the Cowboys, Miles Sanders should be able to get it done. I wouldn't be surprised to see him go for 80 yards. A touchdown, I think, is right in his wheelhouse, and that's going to be plenty enough to justify his ranking at 19.
Do you like him more than Isiah Pacheco this week or David Montgomery?
I think I like him more than Isiah Pacheco just because of the way Jerick McKinnon is playing. It's going to be a shootout. I'm not sure if they're going to be relying too much on the run game, against Seattle. Kansas City is. But David Montgomery, I think he's locked in for enough of a workload in an offense that's really just devoid of weapons that we can keep him over Miles Sanders. But I do like Miles Sanders. I would maybe consider putting him over Isiah Pacheco.
I hear you. Dude, Seattle has been giving up the second most fantasy points over the last 4 weeks. And then The second most over the season. Over the last 4 weeks, Seattle has been giving up 40 fantasy points to running backs each week. That's what they average.
Right.
Which is absolutely insane. That's enough for both these guys.
It would
to
be.
honest.
Unless Jerick McKinnon takes 34 of those points. Like, that's what he's had.
True.
He's averaging 33 points, so that leaves 7 on the table for Pacheco by those numbers.
Hey, you never know, man. 70 yards rushing. I can see that with Pacheco, and that's it.
Yep.
DeAndre Swift, I have him at 21 against Carolina. Obviously just an upside play. He did get some more snaps last week, which is good. You never know what way this pendulum is going to swing this week, though. Najee Harris at 22 against Vegas. Vegas is pretty vulnerable to running backs, and they've been giving up a ton of fantasy points as well. So Najee Harris, he got the volume last week. He ended up scoring. So this Steelers offense is going to be depending on Najee Harris moving forward. And in Pittsburgh, I think this game is going to be a little bit closer than we think.
Yeah, I think it'll be a close game too, and that would be good news for Najee Harris to continue running the ball. They'll keep the game script in reach. No one's going to run away with this game. The Steelers' defense hasn't been allowing a whole lot of points to receivers, I don't think, if that's the case. But I do like Najee Harris in this matchup. He's been just like super consistent the past few weeks. He's finding the end zone more, so that's good. He's looked a little bit healthier since that injury kind of forced him out of the one game, but I like him here. I would be tempted to put him over DeAndre Swift at this point. I think even though he is a floor play, DeAndre Swift, like you said, that pendulum could swing anyway. Justin Jackson is still getting a handful of snaps every game, enough to hamper him a little bit. I would maybe consider putting Najee Harris over him. I'm not sure the upside is there with Najee Harris, but I don't really trust DeAndre Swift at this point. It would be easy to say last week, like a couple of weeks ago, we saw his snaps go up, DeAndre Swift, and we got all excited about it, and it came right back down. I'm not trusting this upward trend last week. I think we could easily see him put up another dud performance this week.
Yeah, I think in a PPR league, I think their floors are pretty similar.
Yeah.
I would say, even if Swift goes down. So because of the chance of some more upside, that's probably why I just lean Swift just by a little bit. Raheem Mostert at 23, I have him here assuming that Jeff Wilson is going to play. If he does not play, I would have him higher. I would probably have Raheem, if Jeff Wilson doesn't play, I would have Raheem Mostert probably ahead of Travis Etienne this week, around that, mid RB2 range, just because of the fact that he has big playability. This Green Bay defense, rushing defense, has been absolutely terrible this year. They're one of the worst in the league. And he could take advantage. He did his thing last week against the Bills, and he had a very solid workload. So I think at home against Green Bay, in a game that's very high scoring, you want to have Raheem Mostert in your lineup, especially if Jeff Wilson doesn't play. Now, if Jeff Wilson does play, I think Raheem Mostert still is a low-end RB2, because I still think he's going to be the 1A with Wilson a little bit banged up, right? Like not at 100%. It's still a good matchup, still a high-scoring game. Raheem Mostert is still going to be involved. So I think he's a pretty good play regardless this week.
Yeah, I like Raheem Mostert, definitely. You talk about the Packers not being very good against the running backs. They've been allowing the 8th most fantasy points to running backs over the last 4 weeks. That's all you could really ask for. And like we said, this is a good weather matchup. You're not going to be worrying about any type of cold weather, even though most of the games are. So I think Raheem Mostert, he's going to be fine. The Dolphins offense should be as dynamic as we've seen it for most of the season.
They're going to be swimming, no flopping around this week.
Swimming,
right?
not flopping, yeah.
Swimming, doing some tricks, all that. J.K. Dobbins at 24. We've seen him be very efficient over the last 2 weeks. This is also a solid matchup against Atlanta. So he's going to take the lead. If Lamar is back, this is a better thing for J.K. Dobbins. Keep in mind the weather isn't amazing. It's like a really cold. It's cold in Baltimore this week, if I'm not mistaken. Temperature in the 20s, 15-mile-per-hour winds. So Dobbins this week, they could depend on the ground game a little bit more. Atlanta, has been pretty vulnerable lately. If Dobbins can continue the efficiency, that'll be great. But just remember that when you're playing Dobbins, you are banking on the efficiency to continue, because you're not going to see Dobbins get a 20-carry game.
Right. And you said that his ceiling in his career, he hasn't broken that 15-carry threshold yet, which
correct.
Kind of disappointing. But it makes sense, I guess, with Gus Edwards in the backfield. He has been super efficient. I think if he scores a touchdown, that's what makes him, a higher. It's going to give him higher upside. We have him ranked as a low end RB2. I think his ceiling's like a high end RB2 if he gets that touchdown. I think this is a very, solid matchup, like you said, against Atlanta, where the offense could do better than they did last week against the Browns, especially if Lamar is back. We'll have to see how that goes. But J.K. Dobbins, regardless, I think he's going to be a safe play. And like you said, if Lamar plays, do you move him up? Do you think a couple spots?
I don't know.
I feel like you
I don't
kind of
think
have
so.
to.
I don't think so.
Would you?
I don't
Okay,
think
so
I do.
would you
Because
trust
I'd
DeAndre
rather
Swift more?
play.
I'm not sure I
think
would.
I think Swift has a higher floor than Dobbins because he's not involved in the passing game at all. He only
Right.
had 13 carries and 15 carries, and he got nearly 100 yards. I don't think it's going to happen every week, man. And I think I'd rather play Swift. I think he has more upside, especially in PPR leagues. Raheem Mostert, I want to take advantage of that matchup. Najee Harris, he's more of a bank to get a bigger workload.
Yep. His
In a good
token 11
matchup.
fantasy points. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and he has a chance of scoring. With Dobbins, at least, like he's not getting you like 11 points without scoring.
Right.
And that's the only thing. With Najee Harris, at least he'll get you 20 carries this week, most likely. That would be my guess.
All right.
But yeah, no, I can see it, man. Like I think Dobbins, he's not at 100% yet, but he's been efficient. And I can understand, taking him over. But I don't. He's not involved in the passing game. It's tough for me to put him any higher than this, to be honest.
All right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I hear you.
And then I got Fournette at 25 against Arizona. I'm even tempted to put Fournette above Dobbins just because of how involved he is in the passing game. This is a very, very good matchup against Arizona. So yeah, I can see myself putting him over Fournette. Putting him over Dobbins this week. And then we got Jamal Williams. I got Jamal Williams at 26 against Carolina. He's been going lower and lower ever since he stopped scoring, and DeAndre Swift has been a little bit more involved in the offense. Against Carolina, this could be a game where they choose to run the ball a little bit. They are a little bit vulnerable in the passing game as well. But it really comes down to a touchdown for Jamal. The offense is good. That's why Jamal's here, and he's their primary goal line guy. That's the only reason why he's here at this point. But AJ Dillon at 27, man, last 3 games, he's put up some serious fantasy numbers, right?
Yeah, compared to what he was doing.
It's kind of fluky though. It's kind of fluky. The 2 weeks before, before the bye, like Aaron Jones got hurt, right, early in that game. So it's like, you got to take that into account. And the last 2 games, like he's been scoring, with a couple several touchdowns. So less than 50% of snaps, less than 40% of snaps, if I'm not mistaken, last week. So how are you handling Dillon this week? Like you want to start him, but like his floor is pretty low.
Yeah, I'd say the floor is really low with AJ Dillon. I mean, the Dolphins, they're a pretty good matchup over the last 4 weeks. They're allowing the 5th most points to running back. So I would maybe give him the benefit of the doubt there. But you talk about the flukiness. This is not a guy that's, producing at a level that's going to be maintainable. You talk about his snap share being down, and I think he's a touchdown dependent RB2. I think high end RB2 is his upside, assuming he scores. But if he doesn't, those touchdowns have made all the difference for his production. If he doesn't get those, it's going to look just like it did a few weeks before this. The past 3 weeks, he's been fine because he's been scoring those touchdowns. But outside of that, it's been single-digit performances. He's not involved nearly enough. And it hasn't changed, he said. And that's 100% something to be concerned about with A.J. Dillon. The only reason I think it makes sense to have him here this high is because of the matchup. And that, it's favorable. I think that the way that the Packers offense is playing, the receivers, they're good, but they still have work to do with Aaron Rodgers as far as, being trusted. Christian Watson's doing his thing, obviously, but Romeo Doubs is back. They just leaned on the running backs a whole lot last week. There's no reason not to do that this week against a defense that has allowed a lot of points to them, coming into the game.
Yeah, and the reason why I have Jamal over him is because Jamal is the goal line guy. With AJ Dillon, Aaron Jones can be in there pretty easily. So, that's my only concern there. And 3 weeks ago when he actually did get it done, he only had 8 carries. In that game. 2 weeks ago it's 18 carries, and this week, on Monday night it was only 11 carries. So he wasn't even efficient.
He wasn't
in the grounds. So yeah. I have him here because he's been doing his thing, but he's a little bit hard to trust for me. Zonovan Knight at 28 against Jacksonville. He has taken a bit of a fall with Zach Wilson leading that offense. Part of his high floor was the fact that he was being peppered a little bit in the passing game, from Mike White, and with Mike White out, I'm a little bit concerned. Now, the good thing is that this is a much better matchup this week than it was last week against the Lions. Jacksonville has been pretty vulnerable to running backs. If this ends up being a close game, which I think it will be, Zonovan Knight could end up getting some getting a little bit of a workload here. Like I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised, that if he gets 15 to 18 carries, and that would be great. However, if he's not targeted in the pass game, and he doesn't score, you're not looking at, a great game, right? That's my only concern with Knight. I think
Right.
he's still a solid flex play and he has a little bit of upside, but he has to score. He has to get in the end zone.
Yeah, I think that's the way I'm treating it too. You kind of have it all outlined the way I would say it, especially with the workload, the chance for him to get some more rushing workload this week being up. I think that's 100% correct. I think that he could get that this week against a good matchup against Jacksonville. The past 4 weeks, last week they played the Lions, and they're actually the worst team you want to play if you're looking for fantasy points from a running back. They're allowing the least fantasy points over the last 4 weeks. The Lions were. So it was a tough matchup. You can give Zonovan Knight a mulligan in this offense. The only thing for me is, like we talked about last week too, with Zach Wilson under center, I'm not sure how much the receiving work is going to be there. You didn't have to rely on a touchdown with Zonovan Knight. With that receiving work there, now you do. I think he's a touchdown dependent, flex play, but he has the upside that makes him intriguing as a play this week against Jacksonville, which is a pretty good matchup. I think they're allowing, is it the 8th or 9th, somewhere in that range, most fantasy points running backs over the last 4 weeks. So it's definitely flipped, in terms of the matchups difficulty. I like Zonovan Knight this week, but definitely temper expectations with him just because that receiving work, it's not there anymore.
Agreed. So, to wrap it up here, we got Zach Moss at 29 and Latavius Murray at 30. Latavius Murray was able to get that volume last week, but, against the Rams is a little bit of a tougher matchup. But I think the volume can be there still because of the fact that this will likely be a close game. The Rams aren't in a high-power offense where they'll be able to get a lot of points scored against a good Denver defense. So that's my only concern there. But it's possible that he definitely gets some volume in this game. So he'll be strictly a volume play, and that's about it. Hopefully Russell Wilson's back, I think. Zach Moss against the Chargers, I have him at 29 here because, listen, like he got the volume last week. This is a great rushing matchup for him. So, I think he's a little bit of an upside flex play. If he gets 20 carries in this game, like that means that he deserved to be a little bit higher in our rankings. Yeah. But my only concern is, like I said before, this game script is very hard to predict for me personally. Deion Jackson could be more involved. They could have looked at the film and be like, oh wait, Deion Jackson's a better player, which he is.
Yeah.
And then he could get most of the workload this week, and he's the guy involved in the passing game. He caught a passing touchdown last week, so you never know. I wouldn't be surprised if Deion Jackson ends up outscoring Zach Moss. But I think you picked up Zach Moss. He got the work last week. Second half was all his. So if I had to choose between the two, I'm going to go Zach Moss.
Yeah, I like Zach Moss too, and it runs kind of contrary to the fact that they might look at the film and change some things. If I'm the Colts, I want to get as far away from what we did in the second half, last week, because that caused you to lose the biggest lead that any team has had in NFL history. So maybe they don't go full Zach Moss, but I don't think there's a situation where Zach Moss doesn't get at least, I think the bulk of the carries, this week. I think that he should have at least 50% of the carries. Definitely going to be more, I think, but that might be his floor. Deion Jackson might have the receiving work, but I like Zach Moss this week just as a shot in the dark play. Someone has to take those carries for Jonathan Taylor, and if Zach Moss is there, you just take whoever you can get. When a hole like that, when a hole like Jonathan Taylor opens, you have to take whoever's going to be filling the hole.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Zach Moss.
And
it's a great matchup against the Chargers, so keep that in mind. Okay, that's going to do it for this episode, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Good luck this week. We'll be back tomorrow with our wide receiver and tight end rankings. That's going to be an interesting one, especially given all the weather. Take it easy, guys. I'll talk to you guys soon. Zach, take it easy, brother. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.